let's move along. I've shifted the lecture schedule slightly. You'll notice a change on the website and a slight change to the titles of the slides. I'm behind about a quarter lecture, and so I've accommodated it by shifting things slightly. So today we're talking about biogeography. I need to finish first with succession, and that'll provide a bridge into biogeography also. We'll focus more on disturbance, a really important part of ecology. Disturbances. What is a disturbance? We don't mean to connote something negative when we say disturbance in ecology, as we'll see. And then we'll get into biogeography proper with species area curves. We'll look at latitudinal diversity gradients and island biogeography. And we'll form a bridge at the end to trophic ecology, and we'll focus on food chains, food webs, and community metabolism starting next week. To wake you up, a dead pig. Dead pigs are wonderful models for decaying bodies in general, but including humans. So forensic scientists, forensic anthropologists actually study pigs or deer or large mammal carcasses with great success in a succession context in order to understand something about the way human bodies decompose or some other body of interest. Yes, it's not for the faint of heart perhaps. That's a freshly dead pig. This is a pig that's starting to bloat. This is a pig that's starting to be devoured by detritivores. This is entering the fully desiccated phase until you get to the dry phase of dry remains. It's a very interesting sequence in theory, at least, if not in aesthetic, because you can study this process ecologically and monitor it as a community process as it occurs. The body decomposed with the action of a whole bunch of other organisms, a whole bunch of other species, and it altered the physical landscape and the vegetative landscape as it happened. You can see changes in the vegetation around the body. A paleontologist looks at this process differently than someone in law enforcement or a forensic anthropologist. A paleontologist sees taphonomy at work. I'm sure that's a subject you covered in the evolution section. The taphonomic process here can be studied and made relevant to paleontological questions. But we're interested in it here from a community perspective, and this is what's intended by degradative succession. It can be a pig, it can be a tree that falls and forms a log that rots in the forest. It too will undergo a successional process, a community succession process, as will a human body when it falls and dies. An organism upon decay enters a community successional process. And if you can study the species of microbia in this case, or arthropods in this case, insects and friends, if you can study the time at which they arrive on the decaying material, and if there's some regularity and trends in the time when they reach their peak abundance and the time when they disappear completely in their activity from the object, you can learn something about the schedule of this community succession and retrace the starting point, particularly back to the time of death. And that's what's of key interest for law enforcement and the forensic anthropologists. If you want to determine the time of death of a body like that, you can do so with a mapping of the community that's part of the system. This is just a hypothetical from a textbook, but by this, if you can isolate, if you know that it's full of species A and none of species G, you get a good indicator just off the bat of how freshly dead the material is, which can be of great relevance. Just another type of succession. So let's think about succession in general now, and we looked at examples of forest succession, a habitat that's disturbed and made open. Imagine a habitat in an area that looks like this. It's a closed canopy forest, and a disturbance comes in and knocks the forest down and opens up the space, changing physical parameters a lot in the process of disturbing that community. And then the community might succeed physiognomically. It would look something like this as it succeeded through to these later stages, starting with annual plants, smaller plants that grow rapidly, reproduce, and attempt to propagate their seeds to another area with suitable conditions. Because these plants may not grow at all under these conditions. They require the conditions here. What are some of the conditions here that these plants might require that are not available here? What are some of the conditions here? Yes. Open sunlight, abundant sunlight in these open conditions. Maybe they're more efficient at photosynthesis at high levels of sunlight. Yes. Just open space, so there's less competition for space in these systems, which might be important for them indeed. Perhaps their roots are not competitive in a tightly packed subterranean environment. Anything else? So the conditions under which these different organisms have evolved have influenced their competitive ability in these different environments, or their adaptability to these different environments. We speak of organisms that are common in early successional phases, oftentimes as R-selected, and those that are effective at later successional stages as K-selected. I'm not going to go into this too much. It's there's a rich literature. I just want to introduce it because you'll see it in your readings, and I want you to understand what it means. But R-selected and K-selected, the terms, come from the logistic equation. An R-selected species tends to emphasize rapid growth and a large reproductive output quickly, early in life. And those organisms tend to fare well in the early successional periods. The K-selected types tend to function well around carrying capacity. They're competitive and efficient in such environments. An organism such as this, which may drop its seeds and drop them, say, into an open area like this, it might not do well at all here because there's too much light. It's not effective at such light intensities. It may have trouble germinating, even getting established in these circumstances. It may drop here and grow slowly until it gets a gap and then grows and finishes its life. But that may occur over very long periods of time. Now, this R-selected and K-selected terminology can apply to the pig. The organisms that arrive early, the pioneers, can be distinguished from the organisms that form part of the later successional stages. So you can generalize this. And some more generalities about R-selected and K-selected species. You don't have to write all this down. It'll be on your slide. But the number of offspring that they produce in a particular reproductive cycle usually is many for the R-selected types and fewer for the K-selected types. The size of the offspring of the propagules may be small for the R-selected types and large for the K-selected types. Why small, many offspring for the R-selected types? What's one good reason they would do that given where they live? Yes. Say that again, please. Okay. Any other points to be made there? Yes. Go ahead. The environment is unpredictable, and thus why would many small offspring be of service? Okay, so you're sort of hedging your bets by producing so many small ones where you haven't invested too much in any one, given the unpredictability of the environments that they're seeking. There's more of a likelihood that one will get established. Do you want to add something there? Yes, predation risks may be increased in larger open areas, and so similarly having many small offspring that are cheap but many might be a hedge against losing so many. You can think about this in the survivorship curve context. You can think about it in terms of iteroparity and semelparity. But there are different categories, so don't be too glib in equating R selectiveness with say semelparity or something like that. Those are good points about these. Yes, if your propagules are small and you're seeking these open areas that might be few and far between, these disturbed areas, it helps to be small because you're likely to propagate further. And that's often the case with these pioneers. They have to propagate great distances. Sometimes they have to lay dormant, in the case of the plants, for long periods of time before they start growing, and it's then that they grow fast and mature in a short amount of time. Once they do germinate, the case-selected types may take longer to mature, but when they do, they produce offspring that are more heavily invested in, say, acorns, as opposed to these little fruiting bodies on this pin cherry tree. The age at first reproduction may be sooner rather than later. Some generalities to think about, okay? Mortality rates, we discussed that a little bit. They're high in the R-selected types, lower in the K-selected types. Lifespans shorter. It's the live fast and die young approach to things, the R-selected types. And in the animal context, parental care is more likely for the K-selected types, where they're investing more in fewer offspring. Disturbances, disturbance ecology. This is a plot that's useful. The data was gathered from this paper. It's hard to ground truth some of this data, so just consider it as a model for discussion rather than something entirely precise and accurate in its depiction, because we're looking at a huge range of disturbance types that can affect ecosystems, communities, and on the basis of how spatially extensive they are and how long it takes for the communities to recover in a successional sense. Right? So a meteor strike at this extreme is a very large disturbance, and a lightning strike at the other extreme may just hit a tree, a single tree. So there's the range of scales of natural disturbances. The circles are natural disturbances. The boxes are anthropogenic, human-involved disturbances like industrial pollution or urbanization. Something like industrial pollution could be considered on a global scale, of course. You could easily have a box here that represents the entire Earth, given the role of emissions in influencing the climate overall and the biota of the Earth. The meteor strike here, they're probably thinking about something like the end Cretaceous event that 99.9% of scientists think played the defining role in the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs, a meteor strike, so something on that scale. A tree fall here, a small event in terms of this scale, but a major force in structuring communities, just falling trees in forests. It's a really important part of succession and forest ecology, particularly in the tropics perhaps, but everywhere there's a forest. So think about these disturbances and the various types, many of which we've talked about. Landslides, we'll talk about fire a bit more today, a tsunami here, volcanic eruptions. A coral reef, we don't have to restrict ourselves to the land environment, of course, to study succession. A beautiful reef like this, a complex reef, has been built over a long time. Whenever you see these complex three-dimensional types of corals, you have a sense that it's been growing for quite a while. The reefs of the world are under terrible threat and assault. They're really struggling for a whole variety of reasons. A bunch of studies this year on the Great Barrier Reef and the bleaching that occurs, the complete death of many whole regions of coral. It's a really difficult problem right now. But a healthy reef would look something like this. Tons of fishes around with all this structural complexity. It hosts great diversity, rivals in its diversity and its productivity, tropical rainforests among the Earth's ecosystems. So if you get a disturbance in a system like this, and it could be a typhoon, a hurricane that comes through and creates strong currents, or I believe this photo was just from a boat that had been trawling, had been dragging gear to trawl the surface, you can level a reef, whether it's a natural or a human disturbance like that. You can just knock the entire reef down, and to grow that three-dimensional complexity back again can take hundreds of years, if it ever occurs. And given all the other factors that are threatening these systems, like a warming water temperature, this reef may never come back like it was. But succession will typically, in an area, all else being equal, reproduce something resembling the original. Not exactly. There's no absolute determinism in that process, but it comes to resemble it structurally in terms of community composition, in terms of its functional differentiation, and that's something we're focusing on today. Fire in terrestrial systems is a major structuring factor in many ecosystems, and it's one that's been studied well over the last decades, but was a late realization on the part of ecologists about its importance. Does anyone get introduced to Smokey Bear anymore? Any of you folks who were born like post-1980? Most of you? Yeah, you still get Smokey Bear? Who's never heard of Smokey Bear? Not many of you, maybe a couple. Yeah, well, Smokey Bear was a cherished icon when I was a kid. And then Smokey Bear fell in hard times because Smokey taught us to prevent forest fires, right? And only you can prevent forest fires. And then Smokey came under attack from ecologists because the message, according to the ecologists, wasn't entirely right. Forest fires are critical to the health and success of certain ecosystems. And without those fires, those ecosystems can't survive. Those community types can't survive. They depend on fire disturbances to resemble the type of system that they are. Chaparral, many open conditions, the savannas we've talked about and the role of fire in those, that if you prevent them, they'll change their community composition and structure in sometimes unrecoverable ways. They're fire supported in California, in coastal California systems, of course. Fire can play surprising roles sometimes these are madrones. I'm not sure about too much of the research behind this, but it's thought that with madrones, your pathogen loads, the pathogens that can affect plants like this, will build up to deleterious levels, but if fires don't pass through, the fires can come through and not kill the trees, but kill the pathogens and reduce them to manageable levels so that the trees can remain healthy. Lose the fires, pathogens can increase to intolerable loads and kill the plants. Sometimes surprising roles like that. Fire in the sequoias. There's just a few patches of sequoia forest left, and they're here in California. Well, we now realize that sequoias require fire. They require fire to germinate, and this is true for other plants, where fire can help to melt the resins that seal up the cones of a plant like this, and without the fire, the seed can't germinate. The seed can't be propagated, and the plant can't germinate. So there would be no reproduction without fire. Not to mention the role that fire plays in burning out the smaller trees that might be building up and competing with the sequoias for nutrients and water. And if they don't occur with sufficient regularity, this type of disturbance, the non-sequoia trees can build up to such levels that they create tremendous fire loads, so that when fire does come, if the disturbance regime is altered and not frequent enough, the fires can be so massive that they burn too hot and too massively and can kill the sequoias. So it's not only that fires needed, but these systems are adapted to fire with certain regimes, with certain intensity and certain regularity. Now, it's not a very strict regularity. It's not entirely predictable. Again, it's not deterministic in a strong sense. But in what we recognize in the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, by hypothesis, is the importance of disturbance in influencing species richness in communities. The idea behind the intermediate disturbance hypothesis is that disturbances at intermediate intensities are correlated with peak richness, or diversity if you want, in many communities. Too high a disturbance intensity or too low a disturbance intensity produces communities with lower richness. So not too big, not too small. It's the Goldilocks phenomenon of just right for the community if species richness is to be maintained at peak levels for the community. Now here's a study that looked at that, because there aren't that many, that when you get into it, there's not that many studies that actually have tested this hypothesis. These guys tried to test it by looking at streams that had experienced different degrees of intensity in New Zealand, and they focused on macroinvertebrates in those streams. Now they measured intensity on the basis of the geology of what they saw. They inferred the intensity and recency of disturbances based on the stream bed, and so it was interpreted in that regard. And they were able to measure intensity on a scale they developed for these different stream communities, and they found that richness peaked at intermediate levels of disturbancy for that group in that place, and it supported broadly the notion of the intermediate disturbance hypothesis. There were other factors at play, as there always are in ecology. Ecology constantly impresses on us the multifactorial nature of these processes and relationships. It's multifactorial, so often our causal explanations. Our old friend Alexander von Humboldt was one of the first to talk about the relationship between land area and species richness. The father of biogeography, if you want. And what's come to be known as the species area curve was this relationship that he discussed in his travels. Remember, he's the one that traveled so widely and influenced Darwin. He noticed that larger areas of land tend to have more species. And that over time it became realized that there was a formal relationship, a mathematically formal relationship, often repeatedly observed between land area and richness of this nature. On an arithmetic scale, you'll see a curve of this shape. If you transform it to a logarithmic scales, it's a line. So log of area and log of richness tends to form a line, and the slope of that line can be interesting when you're comparing areas. So there are various explanations, which we don't need to get into, for why this relationship exists. You can talk about it in your discussion sections if you want. What we just need to understand is that it does. When you sample larger and larger areas, you pick up more and more species, and it tends to fit a line like that on a logarithmic graph, on a log-log graph. So here's a couple of real-world examples, if you don't believe me about that, or believe Humboldt. Breeding birds in North America, the birds that actually breed in a particular area, so you don't count the ones that are migrating through, and a little patch of forest, a very small patch of forest might just have 3 or 4 birds that breed in it, if you're in a place like the temperate forest zone. But as you increase the area and you go to the whole county and the whole state, and then the whole region, and then eventually the whole of North America, you see that type of relationship in the number of species of breeding birds across North America. Tree species in Japanese forests. Different forest types have different shaped curves, but they all fit a species area model, but the curves are of different shapes. Now this one's on an arithmetic scale here, thus not linear, but the same idea. I had more examples and they've disappeared. But one thing we find when we look at those species area curves is that the slope of the curves is different in the tropics. Tropical systems per unit area tend to be more diverse than temperate systems and polar systems. The further you go from the equator, the systems tend to be less species rich or diverse. Why is tropical diversity so high? This is another old observation of people like Darwin and Wallace and Humboldt. That's what was one of the things that was so exciting about some of those scientists leaving Europe. They went toward the equator and found incredible numbers of species. And it's pretty exciting to study beetles in England, but go to the Amazon and you're overwhelmingly excited about how many beetles there are. It's more diverse. Why? It's an old question. It's an old biogeography and ecology question. Why is it so diverse in the tropics? And when you think about why it's so diverse, you have to think about how the diversity originated in an evolutionary or deep time sense, and how it's maintained, how that diversity carries on and isn't lowered through time or something like that. Again, if you don't believe me that diversity is higher, here's some examples. For mammals, the number of mammal species, so the colder temperatures here, the blues, represent more diverse, and you can see how it gets bluer toward the tropics. More diverse, with a peak in this area covered in the Central American tropics, in the forests of Central America. Tropical forests. Birds, same phenomenon. Peak diversity down here, fully 600 some species can be found in an area like that. Whereas you're only talking 30 or 40 species all the way here forward in numbers of bird species. Vascular plants, same idea. All these different groups. Butterflies, same idea. Peaking in diversity at the equator.